Okay, I think we'll start the meeting now. First of all, I want to take care of some housekeeping items. If you have any questions, can you please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Do not use the chat box. We'll be able to see your questions at the bottom of the Q&A screen, and I would prefer that you not use the chat box because we may miss your questions. So if everybody understands that, we can start the meeting now. And welcome everybody. This is our very first District Peace Committee Zoom webinar. And from what I understand, it is also Darren told me that it also the district's very first webinar, Zoom webinar. So we're going to have an inaugural meeting this evening, everyone, for District 7080. First of all, I'd like to introduce my Peace Committee, the District Peace Committee. We have Timothy Whitehead from Rotary Mississauga. We have Ernie Ginsler from Rotary Kitchener, Lowell Ewart from Rotary Grand River Kitchener, Fred Sweeney from Burlington North Rotary, Badar Shamin from Rotary Brampton, Carol Berry from Rotary Brampton, and Anam Nazir, the president of Halton Rotaract. And I just want to thank everybody, all of the committee, for everything that they do for the district. We're hopefully planning to have a couple more of these webinars for you this year as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Holly White. Holly is a Rotary Peace Fellow, and Holly's professional background is in diversity, inclusivity, and leadership, and peace and conflict. She has experience in multilateral peace-building environments, refugee support, youth leadership development, adult education, and volunteer management. She has an MA in Peace, Conflict, and Development, and a Master of Education in Post-Secondary Studies. Holly has received numerous accolades related to leadership, peace, and community building. Currently, she is an advisor at Global Affairs Canada. She hails from St. John's, and Holly is the Newfoundland and Labrador's very first Rotary Peace Fellow. Welcome, Holly. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm so excited to be here and to hear from members of the district.
So please take it over, Holly.
Great. Well, folks, I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with some slides that I have, and these will also be just guiding along the conversation. If at any time you wanted to pose a question in the Q&A box, then certainly feel free to do so. And I'm hoping that towards the end of the presentation, we can also have a bit of a dialogue. So as I've mentioned, I'm delighted to be here this evening. Really happy to be a part of the first Zoom webinar, in fact. So I have a few things that I plan to cover in my discussion this evening that'll kind of lead us through about, give or take, the next 50 minutes or so. And I know that there was quite a bit of ground that I had hoped to cover in the promotional information that went out. So if there's any topics that you have an interest in delving more into, then certainly please drop a note. And I also recognize that some of the guests here this evening have heard me speak before. So if you'd like to shake things up a little bit and pose a really difficult question, I quite welcome that as well. So first and foremost, I wanted to go through a little bit about, share two quotes for what peace means to me. And one I think is quite fitting, that it's from Paul Harris as a Rotary founder. And he phrased it that the way to war is a well-paved highway and the way to peace is still a wilderness. And how I look at that is that I make a commitment to try and build peace and reinforce a sense of community in whatever situation I may be in. And I like this imagery in that I like inviting folks to come along with me as I kind of go through that journey through the wilderness, and it also leaves me to ponder with all the different types of possibilities and things that are not yet discovered, as well as the beauty and potential that exists around us. So that certainly keeps me motivated, and I know you have the screen in front of you, so you can also see the other really fitting quote from the Dalai Lama. And one thing that I take away from this is also that peace is something that we can aspire to do and something that is quite achievable, but it doesn't mean the absence of conflicts. In that conflicts will always exist. It's the management of that, and it's how we solve certain differences that really make the difference. So why is peace and conflict something that I'm interested in, and something that I've tried to incorporate in both my professional life as well as my personal life? And I think that's summed up in these 3 points here. One, in that it's very linked to every other issue with respect to development and justice, human rights, and I think that it's so important for us to be able to unpack that because it is so important. And then, as I mentioned, conflict's inevitable and it will always exist, but violence and a violence approach to trying to solve conflicts certainly is not inevitable. And then on a broader level, we need to really, as like global communities, whether that's respect with government or international organizations such as Rotary, we really need to push ourselves to look away from more of the quote unquote traditional models towards how do we actually sustain a sense of positive peace. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the differences between positive and negative peace. So what I'm hoping you might be able to do, because I know that the opportunity isn't quite available for us to have a bit of a dialogue back and forth, is just to ponder for a moment, what does peace mean to you? And I know that we have some members of the Peace Committee that are here, but I also know that peace is something that is intertwined into so many of Rotary's activities. So even if you just take a moment to pause to think about that, what does that mean for yourself as an individual, as a Rotarian, as a community member, as a professional, in all the different facets of your life? How do you interpret that? So this is a little about me. So I'm going to share also a continuation of what peace means to me. And as I've said, I try to incorporate peace into all aspects of how I live my life, and I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador, so that's a very important thing. And I think that also being conscientious, being deliberate, being inclusive, and taking a pause, being intentional, are all things that to me relate to how one can incorporate peace into your everyday actions, whatever context that is in. But my professional background has also really explicitly looked at peace and peace building, in that for a number of years, I was coordinating social and volunteer programs for mostly government-assisted refugees in Newfoundland and the St. John's area, as well as a number of years coordinating the children and youth programs and then the integration into the Newfoundland and Labrador school system. I've also worked on leadership development for youth, specifically looking at, so for youth and adults, graduate students, undergraduate students, looking at understanding leadership, but also understanding social innovation, social change, and global leadership competencies, so that I really look at those two experiences from more of an interpersonal lens of building a sense of peace and a sense of community, but also as two sides to the same coin, in that in one instance, I'm working very deliberately with a population that might be considered to be vulnerable, to be racialized, and to have experienced trauma. And on the other side, it's working with diverse peoples to help to be able to support communities and support um, a stronger sense of home and of place. And with that, when I look at it also from a peace lens, is I think oftentimes power, who holds the power, who can share the power, who might have power over someone else, is also quite related to our capacity in different situations for what we can do. So that really led me to think about some of the concepts that I was already familiar with, but from the lens of peace and conflict. So I was looking at community, I was looking at team building, I was looking at effective communication. And through my journey with Rotary, being a huge inspiration in my professional career, I also was exposed to the concept of the Rotary Peace Fellowship. And that there are so many opportunities to study these concepts again, even on a greater, more macro level. So I did my fellowship with a focus on peace, conflict, and development, and I worked afterwards with the government of Canada, specifically in a peace building and conflict prevention role, and now more broadly as an advisor in one of our geographic areas. So I also, from kind of my journey and what peace looks like for me, it was from a very individual community-based level to now more of a larger level. And I try and still keep grounded in the picture here that I like the best with respect to that is the little monster who's planting trees. So that no matter what it is that I'm trying to be engaged with or involved with, is that it's with intentionality and it's with that sense of knowledge. So I've alluded a little to this, and I wanted to share a little bit, partly as a sense of gratitude, but also as a potential pathway for folks that you might be interested in promoting the Rotary Peace Fellowship opportunity too. In that, for me, I was exposed to Rotary, like many community members are, all throughout my childhood and growing up, but it wasn't until 2009 when I got really more involved with the community, the Rotary community locally here and within the district in Atlantic Canada, in that I participated in a group study exchange that was from roughly the Atlantic Canada region to the Ishikawa and Toyama prefectures in Japan. And that also was incredible because it was an opportunity where you got to go on, not only was it a professional exchange, it was also a cultural exchange, and it was also a Rotary host exchange, in that we spent about a month and a half visiting different Rotary clubs, doing different presentations, and learning so much about the kind of the broader global Rotary community, and then some of the specific differences between Canada and Japan, and how the meetings are held, and what some of the different customs are. And I think that was quite interesting. And I had stayed engaged with my Rotary club that had nominated me for that program, and I was lucky enough to have been recognized from that community, from that Rotary Club, for a community service award. And then it was on my group study exchange, actually in 2009, when I first heard about the Peace Fellowship program, and it was something that I had aspired to do for a really long time. But it was a number of years later when I finally felt that I would be ready to participate in the global competition. And it was that same club that endorsed me, in the same district that endorsed me for my application. So since then, I participated in the Peace Fellowship, which I'll share a few more details about momentarily, and then made a commitment to myself, again with the concepts of peace at the center of it, but also as a way to really recognize, and with humility, that Rotary has invested so much in me as a professional and as a young professional, and now as kind of a early mid-career professional, that any opportunity that I can to work with or to share with different Rotary groups or districts or Rotaract clubs, et cetera, then I'm happy to do so. Not only from conversations like this, but also from a skills development perspective. If there's any particular topics, then I do some facilitation, and I also stay involved with. Now I actually am one of the reviewers for Rotary Peace Fellowships. So it's kind of neat how it comes full circle. And as you may be aware, and I'm going to talk about shortly as well, is that Rotary International has a partnership with the Institute for Economics and Peace. And through that partnership, they've chosen just over 20 positive peace activators that are from Canada and the US, and they gave us some pretty intensive training in the positive peace framework, and we also give informational presentations and workshops all throughout. So that is kind of how I ended up being the speaker here tonight. So for some of you, I know that you are already familiar with the Peace Fellow program, but the Peace centers, they are actually incredibly generous, and a very much a life-changing experience. So, and it stemmed from the idea of a sustainable peace, so that these Peace Fellows and Peace Fellow alumni then would be able to make a difference in their communities and on a larger level, so that it's investing in not just one person, but future opportunities as well. So you can see here that there's also peace centers all around the world. The newest is the one in Uganda. That's one of the two professional development certificate programs. And also only in the last, I think it's only been in the last few weeks, you may be familiar that they're also opening up another center to be finalized, also in the Middle East, North Africa region. So that's something that's also pretty intense and pretty exciting. So I chose to study in England in the University of Bradford. And there's a number of different components that each of the fellowships consist of. And this is the one that I followed through my master's program, in that I did a Master of Arts in Peace, Conflict, and Development. And I focused on forced migration, looking at different research methods, looking at gender, peace, and development, looking at peace and peace building from a cities and conflict perspective, and also looking at development and international assistance, humanitarian assistance, and different consequences of that. So it's incorporated a variety of different subjects. It's an interdisciplinary field, in that sometimes we're looking at something from a historical perspective or a sociological perspective or an economics perspective, and it's all intertwined. The professors were really engaging. It was also interesting for me because I had previously only finished my studies here in Canada. So it was also interesting that even though the UK could be one of our neighbors, the culture of the institution was also a bit different. And then we had the opportunity, about 2/3 way through our program, each of the Peace Fellows actually got to choose an applied field experience that could be anywhere in the world aside from your home country. And it could be about any topic that you wanted to delve further into that was related to your area of interest and the peace more broadly. And something I'll also highlight again shortly is that, as you can tell from kind of my earlier snapshot, I'm very committed to inclusion, diversity, and forced migration. So I went to, spoiler alert for one of my questions later, the top refugee hosting country in the world, which is Turkey, and did a guest fellowship research position at a university in Istanbul, focusing specifically on the experiences that Syrians under temporary protection had in Turkey. And subsequently, that was what I also chose to write my dissertation on. So we had the opportunity, as all of the Peace Fellows did, to network and really benefit from not only the academic community, the student community, the local community, but also very much the Rotary community. In that we had hosts that we were assigned to, that helped show us around and get us settled, and also kind of that like home away from home vibe. But also there was distance hosts as well, that were in different places in the United Kingdom, where we were able to go for an opportunity to talk to some other Rotary groups and also share some of our learnings and experiences. And my group as well did a tour looking at and contemplating some of the different memorials to war, specifically looking at different places that memorialized World War I in different locations in France and Belgium, and did that with some Rotarians as well. So it was pretty incredible. And we got to participate and also deliver different types of sessions and workshops, and then present our own research to our peers, as well to different academics and different Rotarians that came from all across the United Kingdom to hear us speak. So all in all, we did that in a year and a half, and it was very intense, but it was also really exciting. So the application for the next cohort of Peace Fellows is actually open from now until the middle of May. So if you know anybody who is interested, who has an appetite for these subjects, there's a variety of choices with respect to the different programs that one could rank, and I'm always happy to talk to folks. So it's about 50 or so master's programs are given out every year, and those numbers are a little bit higher when you look at the certificate programs, because they're a little bit shorter. So one thing that I mentioned that comes with the humility of having been selected and having completed a Rotary Peace Fellowship is that there is the hope and also the intention that these Peace Fellow graduates are going to become competent, efficient, experienced, and effective catalysts for peace. So for me, that's a really exciting challenge, but it's also a heavy weight that I take seriously myself. So I'm just going to leave this slide up for a very short second in case anyone wanted to jot down the link. But basically, you can have a local Rotary district that endorses you. So as a district, if that's something that you are interested in, then I certainly encourage you to do so. But if you know of anybody, particularly if you've met any folks that might be interested in the program that aren't currently connected to your district, then you can also apply if you don't have a district that has endorsed you. And that's when folks like myself, different alumni, come in and review applications. So there's a number of different pathways. And while the programs are delivered in English, there's also a push to be able to have diverse individuals from all different backgrounds from all across the world to be able to participate, so that different groups and cohorts aren't necessarily North American based. In my experience, fortunately, I was with a really great group of people, but unfortunately, the optics of how it was set up was that out of 10 Rotary Peace Fellows, I think 7 of them were from the U.S. So that was something that certainly could have been looked at in the year that I attended. So I've already touched a little bit on some of the highlights that I took and that I took away from my program. One thing that was really incredible is that there was very much an opportunity that here is a foundation, and here's a lot of different texts, and the pace I found within the classrooms were intense. But then you had the ability to really zero in on whatever topic that was of interest to you, and then you got to run that by a number of different professors. But you also really could delve into the areas of interest from an academic as well as a practical perspective with some of the supports that already existed in the center. So you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. But as I mentioned, even with the applied field experience, you could literally choose anywhere in the world and you contact them to say, I have funding to be able to come and work for you for free for X number of months. Would you like me to come? And that in itself is pretty incredible. So it's something, of course, I'll never forget. But then it made me ponder when I was finishing up, like where do you go from here? And if aspiring to be a Rotary Peace Fellow and to be able to participate in this program is something that I worked for in such a long time, but also I had done peace work or work that was related to peace and community building for so long. How does this impact my sense of identity? Like, how can I sustain the momentum that exists and kind of make good on that commitment that I made to myself and that I felt I made to the Rotary community that had selected me to go? And then there's also kind of the more practical side of things in that, well, I want to be able to contribute, but I also want to be able to afford rent and maybe one day buy a house and have a family. So you can probably it's probably unsurprising to know that a number of the career pathways, a number of the career fields that are related to peace and peace building um, also may have a variety in levels of compensation. So I am one of the 15% of alumni that works with government agencies. Just over a third of Rotary Peace Fellows work for different NGOs, and just under 10% actually work in research or academia. So I think that this is a nice breakdown, particularly for folks that are applying for the Peace Fellowship, because it also gives you a sense of, well, where can you go from here and what types of careers and opportunities are available to you. And I know for a fact that when I came back to Canada and I was looking for work that I thought would be interesting and would be meaningful and would be challenging, but still related to things that I was quite passionate about, when folks found out that I had gone through the Rotary Peace Fellowship program, that kind of elevated my candidacy in a number of occasions. So again, something that so I'm really grateful very much for. So I'm going to change topics just a little bit. And now I'm going to delve a little more into the partnership between Rotary and the Institute for Economics and Peace. Just give me a quick moment. I just wanted to check to make sure that there were no questions in the box. So I see that we're good to go, so I shall continue. So Rotary, as you know, being intimate partners and Rotarians yourself, it has grassroots work in communities all around the world. The Institute for Economics and Peace focuses on researching the attitudes and institutions and structures of societies, and with an intent to look at what makes a sustainable, peaceful society, and how can that type of peace be realized in different environments. One thing that the Institute for Economics and Peace is probably the most well known for is their use of data and research. So they're very, very data driven, and then distilling that information so that a group like Rotary is able to then apply that into the different work that they do. So I'm going to speak specifically about two different tools. that the Institute for Economics and Peace, or different platforms that they have. One is the Global Peace Index, which is more of a ranking of the most peaceful down to least peaceful countries in the world, and they do this every year. And the other is the Positive Peace Index, which looks specifically at the factors that foster and sustain peace. So the difference here really between positive and negative peace is that negative peace is quantified as the absence of violence or fear of violence, whereas positive peace is the attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and then sustain peaceful societies. So one thing that I always remind groups when I'm speaking with them is that you can have negative peace in a positive environment, but you can also have negative peace in a totalitarian environment as well. So so it's important to look at the nuances between the two. And I'm going to share just a little bit of some of the snapshots from the 2020 Global Peace Index. So here are countries 1 to 83. Canada is in the number 6, and we haven't changed in a little while, so we're consistently in, say, the top 6 or 7, but I invite you to take a look at the top before then and just think a little bit to yourself. Is there any surprises? For example, did Iceland surprise you as being number 1? Or were there any countries that you thought might be considered to be quote unquote more peaceful than Canada? So this right here lists the first 83, but I think there's about 170 countries that are ranked. So giving you a moment to take a look at this slide, I'm actually going to now switch to the least peaceful countries ranked in 2020. And you can see that the bottom number of countries in the bottom 2 have not changed. So Syria and Afghanistan continue to be the least peaceful countries in the world, but kind of the large the bottom 10 or so include Sudan, Russia, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, South Sudan, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, as I mentioned. So there might be a number of countries there, like I said, somewhere in the middle, or closer to the top, or closer to the bottom, that might surprise you. I certainly am also interested in. You can see the arrows that are going down, or the green arrows that are going up. That shows the change in rank or change in scoring. And the Institute for Economics and Peace uses a number of different indicators to come up with their overall score. So here's a question, and I'll just give you a moment to pause or to think about it. In the last 10 years, do you think peace has risen or declined globally? Probably should have gave you a little bit longer to think about that before I changed my slide. Apologies for that. Peace actually declined by 2.5% over the last decade. And while 79 countries became more peaceful, 81 actually became less peaceful. Now, also this, I mean, it needs to be taken further into context of how these stats are being measured, and where kind of that mid-range is, but overall it's pretty telling. Here are some of the numbers that's looked at. Sorry, just let me, I have to change some of my own screen slides, where you can see that we have seen improvements as well as deteriorations. So there are less weapons being imported. So that is shows an improvement. There is also less of an impact on terrorism, which also shows to be an improvement. But at that same time, there are more refugees and more internally displaced folks. Their political terror is also considered to be higher. And military expenditures, as well as incarceration rates, violent demonstrations, and violent crimes have actually increased, which also looks at where some of the different numbers come. Oh, apologies there. And something else that is interesting is that the gap between the most peaceful and the least peaceful countries is actually widening. So that's something to keep in mind as well. In that, as countries are becoming less peaceful, they're actually being left even further behind, which means that different peace building efforts and efforts that are so very intertwined really need to have a focus and an impact, because peace not only is global levels of peace important from a human perspective, it's also important from a financial perspective and a global perspective, which we shall get to in a moment. So if you were to estimate the economic cost of violence globally, do you think this would be in the millions, billions, or even trillions? The global economic impact of violence in 2019 was just over $14 trillion. And they say this is considered to be a highly conservative estimate. The World Bank and the United Nations also in 2018 put out a seminal research, kind of a research paper and findings looking at peace. And they also shared a very similar estimate in that if we were to decrease violence in the world by 10%, we could then redirect some of these savings to other areas, which would then have an even bigger impact on peace building and peaceful ways. So now we're going to move to positive peace. And I'm going to speak a little bit about, this is kind of the teaser slide of the different pillars of positive peace. So the Global Peace Index looks more, like I mentioned, they look at levels of militarization. They also look at levels of violence, numbers of homicides, different numbers of deaths. Whereas the Positive Peace Index looks at institutions, looks at attitudes for creating and sustaining positive peace. So I will indeed share some links. I'm happy to share links to the slides, but I think even I can share afterwards by email with Kathy some links to the reports themselves, because some really great visuals that I didn't have the opportunity to put into the slides. So I wanted to very quickly, I have them here on the screen, highlight that these 8 different pillars are also considered to be intertwined. So you can certainly, when you're thinking about not only different projects or different activities that you within your district or with your individual clubs or even in other aspects of your life are working on, you can focus on one, for example, if something is an anti-corruption activity, or if you're looking at building high levels of human capital, which, for example, would be my participation in a group study exchange or even in the Peace Fellowship, or you're looking at a friendship building program, acceptance of the rights of others. All of these things individually are very important, but they're more powerful, and the peace that it creates is more sustainable when they're interconnected and when you're looking at all different aspects together. So high levels of positive peace are associated with So we have, and I know that you can all read them there on your screen. We have well-functioning government, equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, good relations with neighbors, high levels of human capital, acceptance of the rights of others, low levels of corruption, and a sound business environment. Those are associated with higher per capita income, resilience, community, individual, better environmental outcomes, higher GDP growth, and better performance on the Millennium Development Goals. And the data hasn't yet been aligned to look at the Sustainable Development Goals. So this here slide, I'm not going to read out because I know that you're all competent to be able to read it yourself. But I think that it's helpful to really kind of unpack, well, what does each of these things mean? And then having these examples there on the tip of your tongue can also maybe help as how might you incorporate that into some of the work that you're already doing. So high levels of human capital isn't just how many kids go to school. And a sound business environment, sure, it's related to economic growth, but it can also be related to political stability, which of course can also still be related to low levels of corruption. So you'll see that there's quite a lot of overlap, but I find this slide particularly helpful to kind of delve into some of those concepts a little deeper. So because I spoke to you about the Global Peace Index, I thought it would be interesting to share some of the broader changes in the Positive Peace Index also over the last 10 years. So we can see that overall, there's been an improvement in some of the positive peace indicators, these pillars here, and that sound business environment, free flow of information, they're doing really well. Unfortunately, low levels of corruption is something that definitely needs a little bit more work. And then also what is very interesting, and from a Canadian perspective, this was something that I had a number of questions about, because in many instances, we are, of course, a very important part of North America, but it is not our statistics that contributed to the fact that North America is the only region that did not improve in the last year. So that looked at a deterioration specifically in the United States, which is, I think, both fascinating as well as perhaps not surprising, given the recent events in the last number of years. So I have here another kind of food for thought slide. And I am also, I see that there's a number of questions. Thank you. And I will delve into those very shortly. So these are just like a food for thought moment of how can you use those 8 pillars of positive peace to enhance the work that you do with respect to the areas of focus with Rotary, and in what ways do you already promote or focus on some of the different roles in positive peace? Sorry, the different pillars of positive peace. So that can also be something that you think about, not only for yourself, but also maybe to bring back to some of your clubs and have that conversation a bit more explicitly. So the last area of my presentation is I'm going to go back to a topic that I'm quite fond of and always push myself to learn more about, and hope to educate others. And for me, that's related to forced migration. So I have a couple of stats here on this first slide, and then I'm going to pose a number of questions similar to just kind of have a bit of a thought, and we will then hopefully have some Q&A back and forth. So there are 79.5 million people who are forcibly displaced, and of those individuals, 26 million of them are refugees. This, although it is data that is already over a year old, it is the most recent data that is on the United Nations Refugee Agency's website. So that number is pretty astounding. And here are some questions that I have for you to consider. What percentage do you think of the world's displaced population are children? And also, I know I showed you kind of the countries listed, most peaceful, least peaceful. What do you think might be at least 2 of the top 5 refugee producing countries? Another one, which I was fascinated myself before I learned more about this, was, and it might give away the answer, is do you think the majority of displaced people are hosted in developed or developing countries? And why might you have that opinion? Also related to refugee hosting countries, name 2 countries that you think hosts the largest number of displaced people. And then my last 2 questions are a bit of a punch in the gut. Certainly, I think to me, but also to us globally. So we know there's about 80 million displaced people in the world. How many do you think were resettled to a safe country in 2019 out of 80 million? And then how many refugees do you think Canada accepted in 2019? And that's the last number that I could get official stats from Canada. Now, as I kind of pose these questions, it's meant to be a bit of a food for thought, and also, as I've mentioned, I've worked for a number of years here in Canada with a refugee servicing organization, and I think that also these situations, anything, of course, is very nuanced. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt, and I think that something like increasing numbers of refugees that are being accepted isn't necessarily always the greatest solution, because there needs to be the infrastructure, the support, the education. These things need to come hand in hand. So while I have these questions here as a food for thought, please don't misconstrue that I have in my back pocket a list of all of the great things that if we implemented tomorrow, we would have a more peaceful country. But I do think that they're kind of good food for thought. So let's see what the answers to some of these questions are. 40% of the world's displaced people are children. 85% of the world's displaced people are hosted in developing countries. 73% are hosted in neighboring countries. The top source countries that are the top refugee producing countries, the top 5, are Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. And the top hosting countries, I already gave away number 1 when I mentioned that was the primary reason I chose to do my Apply to Feel experience in Turkey. But then the other top refugee hosting countries are Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, and Germany. And in 2019, out of almost 80 million people, globally, 107,000 were resettled. And here is a very quick snapshot, and this is from 2019 of immigration in Canada. And the number that I want you to take a look at is right here. So Canada resettled just over 30,000 refugees. And in fact, at that time, for permanent resettlement, this is only last year, well, just over last year, now that we're in 2021, that was the highest number of any state worldwide. And that's great. Canada has a fantastic reputation for its sense of inclusion and acceptance. I think that Canada also has a lot of challenges, and that we can certainly be challenged to make our communities more open, and confront the racism and the discrimination from not only newcomers but from folks that are already here, and of course from many of our Indigenous populations, and confronting some of our own history. But I will also share like quite moving experiences when I was doing some interviews with refugees in Turkey as a part of my research project with a professor. I had individuals that were almost in tears thanking me on behalf of like Canada for having resettled their sister or their cousin or someone they knew, or knowing that our leader at the time had really made a statement of solidarity. So I think that it is very important, and I think that we should be proud that we are Canadians. But I also think that when we look at some of the stark numbers, it does beg the question of what can we do, whether it's with an area that I've mentioned I'm interested in with respect to refugees and forced migration, or whether it's related to anti-corruption, or including a better flow of information, or in engaging and enriching the potential of youth. What is the area that you're looking at, and you would like to really kind of nudge that push forward for a more peaceful environment, and kind of take that idea and take that seed and take that nudge, and then run with it. So I look at it, and this is a really nice slide that I was happy to take from the Rotary IEP training that I did, when it looks at imagining potential, but it looks at it from the intra-personal perspective. So for yourself, and how you're feeling, your relationships with others, whether that be your family, your partners, your friends, within associations, clubs, government, broader networks, or also with respect to kind of something that it was really fascinating for me in the last couple of years, was looking at peace and peace building from a state to state perspective, and also with that sense of power and power dynamics, and countries that offer international assistance versus countries that receive it, countries that are in a constant state of fragility or conflict or violence, and sense of agency, sense of importance, and understanding different customs and cultural values. Like there's so much that can be done, and can be so complex on different levels, that I think having something like this that really kind of helps me take a deep breath and look at, okay, it starts with me, whether that comes from self-realization, self-reflection, and then there's the opportunity to grow, and to share from there. So lastly, here are my presentation, and I know there's a couple of questions that I'm going to go to as well. One thing that's not in my slide, but I've been thinking about it a little bit, because in my current role, one thing that I look at, particularly with respect to COVID times, and the impact that the pandemic has had on the workplace and on my workplace. And I'm an advisor to a director general, and he's responsible for not only Canada's engagement in North Africa, Israel, and the West Bank and Gaza region, but also for over or supporting the well-being of a number of employees. And we think about how can we develop and really support folks in this time where we're cut off from others, and some of the ways that we might look to remain connected and to have that sense of community has very much been impacted. And we're living in a time of uncertainty, an unprecedented time of fear and anxiety, and I was thinking a little bit about how easy it would be if only I was a real life Care Bear, and I could do that Care Bear stare and be able to just, share some of that positivity. And I recognize very much so that it is not that easy, but that we do have many different opportunities in our day-to-day life to work on something, whether it's a shorter challenge or a larger one, to impact the world more peacefully. So with that, I'm going to very quickly look at some of the questions, answer ones that I can very quickly, and also make an important caveat that while I do work for the Government of Canada, I'm in no way representing my work here tonight as a public servant. So the economic impact of
Holly?
violence. Oh yes, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry, Holly. Do you want to read the questions and answer them, which is fine? I can.
Sure. Yep, that's not a problem. I can see them right here on the page.
Okay.
But
Yes.
please let me know if I go through some and I seem to have missed any. Please also let me know. The economic impact of violence slide. Those figures were in U.S. dollars. Peace graduates that have gone into arts and culture, most definitely, and I think it's incredible. One of the individuals that I actually met at a Rotary Peace Conference in California in early 2019 was they looked specifically at creative writing and peace building, and looking at differences between overcoming some differences between polarized communities. One of my colleagues, who's incredible, his name is Will McInerney. He's got a number of pieces available on YouTube. He's a spoken word poet, but also specifically looks at confronting and understanding masculinity from poetry, and looking at that as a way of understanding and regulating emotions, and also spreading education and awareness. And it's actually something that he then received a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation scholarship to do his PhD on at Cambridge in the UK. So that's pretty incredible. So there's certainly a lot of opportunities, whether it's from an education perspective or an arts and culture perspective, where folks are interested in that. For the return on investment with respect to Rotary Peace Centers, I'm not sure what that stat would be, or if even the stat is available to kind of to estimate it. One thing that's tricky, and that's why I find so fascinating about the estimates that that the World Bank, the UN, and even IEP is able to give, is that measuring peace is often related to looking at what would have been the cost if there was violence. So looking at like kind of what the decreased level in violence of would be a very interesting project for someone in the Rotary Foundation to be able to do. So again, this is my own opinion, but I think that corporately owned prisons, I think a lot of places, I want to phrase this also in a way that is delicate, but I think that it is possible to have an enterprise that also does good, and it is possible to have something that is profitable, that doesn't have astounding negative impacts. I think in the example of corporately owned prisons, I would not agree that is the case, and I think that it's something that I don't know enough about to be able to really comment on in terms of specifics. But I think that that it certainly impacts peace and peaceful environments, and we do know that the prison pipeline is also racialized, not only in the U.S. but also in other places such as Canada as well. So I think that there's a lot of complexity to that question. But it's certainly not something that I think of at first reaction in a positive light. Would certainly be happy to share slides, and I also, with the last question that I see with respect to mental health clinicians in fostering and advancing the notion of peace, I think that this is something that I would consider to very much to be peace work. And it could depend explicitly on the context if we're looking at like de-escalation of violence or self-regulation tools. But from some of my own educational experience, but also participatory experience in these in availing of some different resources, I know that a lot of it is key to some of the concepts of leadership and leadership development that I'm more familiar with, in that at the center it is self-understanding and growth that can really drive the process. So there are anyone from any type of background is able to apply to the Peace Fellowship program. I mean, you do need to have an academic background, and like I said, the competition process is pretty detailed. But folks have backgrounds in arts and sciences, in health, in music. It's really broad. So I know that I certainly felt pretty lucky to be included. So yes, thank you, Lorraine. Will is an excellent person to listen to on YouTube, and we were blessed to have another number of his performances while in Bradford. So I know that we're about at time. So yes, I'll pass it back over to Kathy.
I just wanted to say, Holly, that that people can't see the questions, so I was just going to read them out.
Apologies.
I don't think they can see them. Can they, Darren?
Yeah, I think that Holly made a good job of going through them all. So I think we're good to go.
There's just one question. Did you answer the one about the refugee children?
No, I don't think I saw that one. Might you be able to read that to me? Okay.
So just a reminder to people that if you have questions, put them through the Q&A and not the chat.
Yes. They're all in the Q&A, thankfully.
Great. Might you be able to read it out loud if I can't see it?
I can read it. 40% of refugee children, refugees are children. The ones who landed in Canada need to improve their English language command. Mississauga Rotary offers free reading program as part of the New Generation efforts. Is there any study that measure how the support going for refugee children to get language abilities to join schools in their landing country? Can you see that question?
I cannot see it, but thank you for reading it. I don't know of any stats off like any research that currently exists, but what I can share is from some of my own experiences, not just in Newfoundland, but in being a part of kind of the more broader Atlantic as well as national resettlement community, in that because education is something that is delivered by the provinces, that it's actually it can actually be different approaches for different groups of students. And in some areas, there are more resources than others. So, for example, some places, and I know in some best practice, it's like separating newcomer children to be exclusively in an English language learning program rather than mixing with their peers, has some benefits, but it also has some detriments. But also, at least in Newfoundland, you're placed in your age appropriate grade, and not necessarily in the grade of your ability. So we would have and have had a number of individuals that came 15, 16, 17 years old, that if they had have been placed in their academic level, like after being tested in English, they came from backgrounds where they hadn't had access to formalized education for over a decade. Their parents were perhaps, like sometimes we get folks that are very well educated that are also refugees, but we also have folks that their parents don't know how to read and write in their own native language, not only just Canada. So I had a number and worked with a number of individuals that would have been placed in kindergarten or grade 1 at 16, 17, 18 years old. And in other places, a couple of the kind of the larger centers, in a place here in Newfoundland, which is quite a different context than in most places in Ontario, of course, is that there would be a program which focuses on bringing up the English as a second language level, as well as the literacy and numeracy skills of students, and that they spend probably maybe 2/3 of their time with a special resource teacher looking specifically at numeracy and literacy skills, and then some of their time would be with their age appropriate peers that would be considered local children or youth for activities like gym or music or different social activities. And then in itself, it can be a challenge. So as I see Marianne has made a comment in that in Ontario, each Board of Education does things differently for children learning English as a second language. That's also, I think, pretty on par in that there's different approaches, and we know that learning English is essential, or of course, depending on where you are and where you're landing, also learning in a French environment can also be a challenge, but it's imperative to be able to integrate right now. And then another kind of one of the last kind of food for thoughts that I might leave you with is that also there are many times and many opportunities where children can actually learn a language much more fluidly and faster than their parents or extended family members. And while this is incredible and can be really helpful, it also comes with oftentimes a burden of responsibility that children feel and are sometimes deliberately asked to do, to be able to then support family members or accompany to medical appointments or get involved in situations where it might not be considered to be a healthy situation. So that's something as well. So with respect to the question that Pierre has asked, is how does our country rank in how accepting we are of differences? He mentions, I find that describing Canada is as a tolerant society as a negative attribute. It seems that there's little tolerance for accepting differences and perhaps on the verge of not tolerating these differences. I don't know with respect to some of the exact numbers. It's something that we could probably pull out within the Positive Peace Index ranking, but offhand, I'm not sure. I know that Canada has a really great reputation, and as a Canadian, then sometimes I'm proud of that reputation, but I'm also sometimes disappointed that that's not necessarily the reality that I see or that I know of on a regular basis. So as I've said, I think that there's always an opportunity to do more, to be intentional, to be deliberate, and to really create the type of environment and society that we want to live in. And I look at it as like living my leadership and living my peace. So there's the last question that I'll probably acknowledge is one from Dennis, is that, are there any people with training and knowledge, such as you have, in problematic countries that can make a difference in their countries? And I would like say yes. Like very, very broadly, yes. There are so many people and there's so much potential. And I think as well, one thing that from like an international assistance, international development, or kind of a global peace and conflict lens is that it's also very imperative that that solutions should also be driven by the local people that understand the nuances and the culture and the history, and that doesn't mean that that should be done without a sense of collaboration, but that yes, there are certainly lots of people with lots of skills, and being able to kind of break down some barriers and continue that positive pipeline of that high capacity for others and increasing opportunities and stemming from education and partnerships is still a very large task to undertake. But I'm humbled to be a part of a large global network from all around the world that looks at these types of topics. So I know that I spoke quite a bit. I thank you so much for your time and your patience, and for allowing me to kind of be a guinea pig in the webinar. And I regret that there wasn't as much I guess, explicit back and forth, but I certainly hope that if nothing else, I've given you some pause for thought on early into the week, and that you have a great rest of the week and stay safe and sound.
Holly, thank you so very much. That was a fascinating presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure if we thought about it some more, we'd have a lot more questions. But I truly thank you. And I appreciate all the attendees coming out this evening to listen to you. Thank you. And also Darren Sweeney for helping us through this inaugural Zoom webinar. Thank you, Darren. And Holly, on behalf of the District Peace Committee, we are going to make a donation to the Rotary Foundation and the Peace Arm of the Rotary Foundation in your name for your presentation this evening. And we thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And I would also like to, if anyone is interested in getting any slides, please send me a message and I will get them to you via Holly. Thank you all for joining again. Have a great night. Bye for now. Bye, Holly.